deaf waitress helped a silent girl speak again, and the widowed dad fell in love. On a rainy afternoon in the heart of Seattle, a small coffee shop tucked between two quiet streets radiated the warm scent of cinnamon and espresso. The sound of grinding beans, clinking cups, and gentle murmurs wove together the kind of ordinary comfort found in everyday moments. But within those walls, something extraordinary was about to happen. A deaf waitress, a weary single father, and a little girl who hadn't spoken in almost a year. Their paths were about to cross, and nothing would be the same again. Maya didn't hear the drip of coffee or the hurried calls from the kitchen, but she felt the rhythm of the cafe in everything, the sweep of a hand, the curve of a frown, the rush in someone's eyes. At 25, Maya had been working at Willow and Bean for nearly 3 years, a quiet little shop best known for its buttered waffles and peaceful charm tucked in downtown Seattle. She wore hearing aids but rarely turned them on. Silence was often her safest place. Everything ran as usual until someone unfamiliar walked in. He didn't stand out in the way most people do, but there was something in his posture, tired, but not just physically. The dark coat slightly wrinkled, the hollow look in his eyes. And beside him stood a small girl, maybe 6, with light brown hair, perched on a chair near the window, staring out like she was waiting for someone from another world. "Table 4, a woman's voice cut through the room, just loud enough for Maya to read her lips. "That kid's been standing on the chair for 5 minutes. Maya glanced over. It was true. The girl didn't move much, just traced invisible circles on the glass with her fingers. The man, she would later learn his name was Callum Blake, reached out gently, but the girl didn't respond. No one knew she hadn't spoken a word in nearly a year. Maya stepped away from the counter and approached the table. She knelt beside the girl, slowly, gently, like any sudden movement might scare her away. She didn't speak. She signed. "Would you like something to drink?" The girl froze. Then, very slowly, her small hands lifted and signed back. "Strawberry milk?" Callum stiffened. His eyes widened in disbelief. Did she just respond?" Maya smiled, then pulled a small notepad from her apron and wrote, "I'm deaf too. I understand." His gaze dropped to the paper, then back to her. For the first time that day, the panic in his eyes softened. She hasn't responded to anyone, not in almost a year. Maya gave a slight nod and turned to the girl again, signing, "I'll get your milk." When she returned with the drink, the girl was sitting properly now, her legs swinging, tapping a quiet rhythm on her knees. Maya placed the glass before her, adding a small flourish with her hand. The girl smiled, shy but real. Callum sat silently, holding a cup of black coffee, never taking his eyes off his daughter. They barely spoke the rest of the visit. The girl ate grilled cheese, sipped her milk. Every now and then she laughed at Maya's playful signs, replying with simple gestures. "Thank you." Funny. Before leaving, Callum paused at the counter. He hesitated, then scribbled something on a napkin and slipped it beneath his cup. Maya only found it later while clearing the table. "Thank you for making her smile." Just one short line, written in slightly tilted, hesitant letters. And yet Maya couldn't bring herself to put it down. There was something about the handwriting, something gentle and uncertain, that made it feel like more than a thank you. It felt like a breath that had been held in too long, finally released. She folded it carefully, almost reverently, and slipped it into the pocket of her apron as if afraid the ink might vanish if she didn't treat it gently. She had no idea why she was keeping it. She didn't even know who the man was. But his eyes, the way he had looked at his daughter with exhaustion and fierce love, stayed with her. When her shift ended, Maya walked home through the quiet side streets of Fremont, the air cool and damp. Her apartment sat just above an old flower shop called Daisy Roots, where the scent of lavender always lingered in the hallways. The apartment itself was small, worn in places, but warm. Faded curtains Maya had sewn herself fluttered gently at the windows. Everything inside felt lived in, not perfect, but cared for. Inside, her younger brother Leo was sprawled out on the floor, surrounded by history textbooks and highlighters. His hearing aids rested quietly on the side table. At 17, Leo had been deaf his whole life, just like Maya. But his world seemed lighter somehow. He smiled easier, maybe because Maya had always carried the weight for both of them. She poured 2 mugs of chamomile tea, handed one to Leo, then sat beside him. With a smirk, she signed, "You need sleep, not history." Without looking up, Leo signed back, "You need to stop worrying. I'm fine." She smiled, though the weariness in her eyes gave her away. The endless cafe shifts, the mounting medical bills, the rent that was already overdue, it never really left her. There was a time Maya dreamed of becoming a teacher for deaf children. She'd filled out applications, written essays, and carefully planned her path. But after their mother passed and their father disappeared, dreams became a luxury she could no longer afford. She didn't complain. She just adapted. Took more shifts, cleaned houses, sold hand-sewn crafts online. She stayed for Leo, so that he could keep his dreams even if she had to let go of hers. That night, after Leo had gone to bed, Maya sat by the window with the napkin in her hand once more. The soft street light outside cast a gentle glow across the room. She reread the words, "Thank you for making her smile." Then she placed it inside a small tin box, the one where she kept the pieces of herself she couldn't afford to lose. Leo's second-grade crayon drawing, the last photo of their mother, a few scholarship letters she never mailed. And now, this napkin, a quiet reminder that sometimes even the smallest kindness can leave a lasting imprint. She didn't know if the man and his daughter would ever return, but deep inside, she hoped they would, not because she was curious, but because something in that little girl's eyes looked familiar. Like a child who hadn't spoken, not because she had nothing to say, but because no one had really listened. The next day, the cafe opened just like any other morning. Customers came and went, the machines hissed and steamed, and Maya went about her usual tasks, except she caught herself glancing toward the door a little more often than usual. She wasn't waiting for anyone, she told herself. Just curious. Then, around 10, as she wiped down the table by the window, the door opened. Maya turned, and her heart skipped. Callum had returned. Sophie walked beside him, her hand clutching his sleeve. They looked the same as the day before, but something was different. The air around them felt lighter. Callum's steps weren't as heavy. Sophie scanned the room, eyes searching. When they landed on Maya, her entire face lit up. She waved shyly, her other hand clutching a gray stuffed fox. Maya smiled and signed, "Good morning, little one." Sophie signed back, a little clumsily, but clearly, "Friend." They sat at the same table as the day before. Maya didn't ask. She simply brought over a fresh strawberry milk and a warm muffin. Callum gave a quiet nod of thanks as she set down his black coffee. "She asked if she'd see you again today," Callum said softly, his voice still low but no longer hollow. "I'm Callum, by the way, and I guess you already know Sophie." Maya nodded and scribbled in her small notepad. "Maya, nice to meet you, officially." Callum smiled slightly, his gaze flicking to the window, then back at her. "I told Sophie we're on vacation, but really, I'm just trying to pause everything, catch my breath." Maya nodded again. She didn't ask more. Everyone's running from something, even if they don't say it aloud. From that day forward, they returned nearly every morning, usually after the morning rush. They always sat by the window. Maya always had strawberry milk ready. And Sophie, she didn't cling to her father anymore. Between tables, Maya would stop by, playing games with Sophie, animal signs, emotion charades, little doodles paired with gestures. Sophie began to smile more, laugh more, and slowly she started speaking, not with her voice, but with her hands. One morning, after Maya signed elephant and curled her arm like a trunk, Sophie let out a loud, bright laugh. The entire cafe paused. Maya laughed too, but Callum, he froze, coffee halfway to his lips. He hadn't heard that laugh in so long, it felt like a forgotten sound. Later, while Sophie colored in the kids' corner, Callum stood silently by the counter. Maya thought he was waiting for a refill, but he just stared into his cup. "She used to laugh like that all the time," he said, more to himself than to her. "Before everything changed." Maya paused, listening. After her mom left, she stopped speaking. "We tried therapy, special schools, everything. Nothing worked. Eventually, we stopped pushing. Maybe I was just scared to face how much of her I'd already lost." He looked over at Sophie, her little hands smudged with crayons. "People say kids are resilient," he continued, "but maybe they just get good at hiding the cracks." Maya didn't reply. Instead, she reached over and gently tapped the back of his hand with 2 fingers, a quiet sign that meant, "I understand." Callum looked down, then back up. "What about you?" he asked. "What did you dream of?" Maya paused, then wrote in her notebook, "I wanted to be a teacher for deaf kids, but dreams cost money, and my brother needed me more." Callum read slowly, then said quietly, "You'd be an amazing teacher." Maya turned away, pretending to straighten the napkin holder, but a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. And in her eyes, something began to flicker. Something warm, something new. Their morning games had become a quiet routine. Maya would play Guess the Animal or pull silly faces for Guess the Emotion. Sophie picked up signs quickly, and every time she got one right, Maya clapped, pulled a big smile, and drew little animal doodles on napkins to gift her. One morning, Maya signed elephant, curling her arm to mimic a trunk. Sophie stared for a moment, then suddenly burst out laughing, loud, clear, and full. The entire cafe froze. Callum, coffee halfway to his lips, went still. He turned slowly toward his daughter, eyes wide, like he was seeing a miracle in real time. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh like that in far too long. Later, behind the counter, Maya overheard Mara, the cafe owner, sighing as she held up an electric bill. "Gonna have to cut something. If not, we won't make it through the month." Maya didn't say anything. She just kept wiping the counter, but her eyes betrayed concern. The next morning, the bill had been paid. No name, just a handwritten note left near the register. "Thank you for keeping a warm place where smiles come back." Maya folded the note and tucked it into her pocket. When Callum and Sophie walked in that day, she looked at them a little longer than usual, said nothing, just smiled, a smile filled with quiet gratitude and something more hesitant. After Sophie darted off to the kids' nook, Callum approached the counter. From his coat, he pulled out a small white handkerchief embroidered softly with a pale-colored M and delicate flower patterns. "Saw this at the market near the motel," he said quietly. "It's small, but I thought maybe it fits someone who gives warmth so freely." Maya ran her fingers along the stitching, gentle as if touching something fragile. She didn't speak, but her eyes met his. She could feel something stirring, something gentle. But just like Sophie, who had once hidden so deep inside herself, Maya remained cautious. Her heart, though beginning to thaw, wasn't quite ready to open fully. Life had begun to settle into a quiet rhythm. Each morning, Callum and Sophie returned to the cafe. Maya would have the strawberry milk ready, along with a few freshly drawn sign language cards. Sophie grew more confident, waving at customers, signing little stories to Maya, sometimes laughing out loud at her dad's silly faces. She was no longer the still, silent girl by the window. And Callum, though still quiet, started to look like a man beginning to believe things might get better. He took notes in his old leather-bound notebook. He listened when Maya signed, not just with gratitude, but with something deeper. As for Maya, she found herself thinking about them more often, folding napkins, wiping tables, wondering if she was beginning to feel something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. One breezy afternoon, she caught herself wondering, if this were a story, would she be allowed to hope for a soft ending? But every gentle story has its turning point. And sometimes the storm doesn't arrive with thunder, just a manila envelope slid under a motel door. Inside it, a cold reminder that the past never really goes away. Camille had found them. The envelope slid quietly under the door, but its weight landed like a punch to Callum's chest. He sat frozen at the edge of the bed, staring at the manila folder, hands limp in his lap. The motel room was silent, save for the soft ticking of the worn clock on the wall. Sophie lay on her stomach, sketching in the corner, the sound of her crayons on paper, faint and distant. When Callum finally opened the envelope, his eyes scanned the cold printed lines. Camille Bennett, petition for custody hearing. Court date set in 3 weeks. His breath caught. He had known this day would come, but not so soon. Not like this. Camille, the woman who walked away without a word, who had vanished when Sophie needed her most, now wanted her back. Not out of love, but for image, for leverage, for headlines. Camille hadn't changed. Calculating, polished, cruel when it counted. Callum could still hear her voice, sharp and smug. "You're just playing the grieving dad. You don't know how to raise a child." He turned his gaze to Sophie, who was coloring a picture of Maya standing behind the cafe counter, her hands mid-sign. At the top of the drawing, in crooked little letters, Sophie had written, "Safe." Callum swallowed hard. His grip on the court papers tightened before he let them drop to the floor. They landed like a verdict. He didn't tell Maya, not because he didn't trust her, but because he couldn't bear to pull her into the chaos. He knew Camille. If she found out another woman had connected with Sophie, she'd use it, twist it, weaponize it. So the next morning, Callum didn't bring Sophie to the cafe, nor the next, or the one after that. At Willow and Bean, Maya felt the absence before she even unlocked the front door. The little window table looked oddly dim. The air hung heavier. There was no burst of small footsteps, no silent giggle, no eager fingers signing "friend." Each time the bell above the door jingled, Maya looked up, and then back down again. She didn't ask anyone. She didn't explain to Mara, but she still prepared the strawberry milk, still drew new flashcards with fresh markers. And every night before she closed her notebook, she wondered, what happened? By the 4th day, Maya stood by the counter, cradling the untouched glass of milk. Her eyes lingered on the door, but it didn't open. Not today. Her chest tightened, not from routine being broken, but from the quiet certainty blooming in her gut. Something was wrong. On Thursday afternoon, after her shift ended, Maya packed up quickly and left the cafe with her usual tote bag slung over her shoulder. Inside it, a blank sketchbook, a box of crayons, and a few hand-drawn sign cards she hadn't had the chance to give. The rain had returned to Seattle, soft, quiet, the kind that didn't soak your hair but made the sidewalks shimmer under the street lamps. Maya boarded a slow-moving bus toward the southern side of the city, to a row of motels she remembered Callum once mentioning in passing. She arrived at a weathered building nestled between a laundromat and a second-hand shop. Inside, creaking wooden stairs, a hallway that smelled faintly of damp walls and old memories. She stopped in front of room 203, took a breath, then knocked twice. Silence. Then the door opened. Callum stood there, t-shirt rumpled, hair slightly messy, eyes wide in disbelief. "Maya," he said softly, like the name had been caught in his throat. She smiled gently, didn't speak, just held up the sketchbook and crayons, then signed, "I thought Sophie might like to draw." He hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. "Come in." The room was small, a bed, a table, a lamp with a soft yellow hue. Sophie sat curled in a chair, clutching her stuffed fox. When she saw Maya, she lit up instantly. Her little body bounced upright. She smiled wide. Maya knelt on the floor, sitting across from her. She opened the sketchbook, spread the crayons like small treasures. Sophie said nothing, but her eyes gleamed like the sun after rain. Maya drew first, a happy sun, a sad cloud, then handed Sophie the crayon. The girl stared at the page for a long while. Then, slowly, she began to draw, a large heart in the center. Inside it, 3 stick figures, one tall with short hair, one with a bun, and a small one holding a toy fox. Sophie pointed to each. Callum, Maya, herself. Then her tiny hands lifted, slow, steady. "Family?" Callum sat against the wall, hand over his brow. His eyes were red. He didn't speak for a long while. After Sophie curled under the blankets for a nap, Maya poured 2 cups of water and stood by the small kitchenette. Callum walked over, quiet beside her. He didn't need prompting. He began to speak. About Camille, the court papers, why he disappeared, the fear of pulling Maya into something she didn't deserve. "I thought, if I involved you, Camille would twist everything, turn it into headlines. You deserve peace, not this mess." Maya didn't respond. She simply turned, reached up, and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. Not gripping, not trembling, just there, warm, steady, present. "I'm here." No words needed. They didn't speak much that evening. They didn't need to. Sophie slept soundly, arms wrapped around her drawing of the heart with 3 people. Callum sat beside the bed, eyes fixed on his daughter as if trying to memorize the rhythm of her peaceful breathing. Maya sat at the foot of the bed, quiet, her hand resting on the now-closed sketchbook. The room didn't say much, but it held everything unspoken, the fragility of what they had, and the looming weight of what might come to take it away. The next morning, Callum walked Maya home early. Before she stepped out, he whispered, "I won't let Sophie walk into that courtroom alone." Maya simply nodded, her hand resting lightly over his, a silent promise in return. She understood, and if he let her, she wouldn't let him walk in alone, either. 2 days later, the court hearing would begin. Camille would return. And this time, the truth had to be heard. Not just with words, but with the heart. The courtroom felt colder than usual that morning, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the weight of everything hanging in the air. Callum adjusted the collar of his shirt, not for appearances, but to keep his hands from shaking. He sat beside Sophie, one hand resting gently on her shoulder, like a barrier, a silent promise. The doors swung open, footsteps echoed sharply against the tiled floor, the past announcing its arrival. Camille Bennett entered, flawless in every detail. Hair styled perfectly, cream coat over a sleek black dress, lips painted red. She didn't look at Sophie, not once. She walked straight to her seat as if stepping onto a runway. Her lawyer stood first, a man with a voice like polished glass, each word carefully rehearsed. "Your Honor, my client is the biological mother of this child. She has been unjustly alienated. This girl used to speak. Now, under Mr. Bennett's care, she relies solely on sign language, lives in a modest motel, with no structured education, no formal therapy." Camille stood as cued, her voice trembling at the right moments. "I just want my daughter to have a normal life," she said, tears welling. "Every night, I wonder if she's crying for me." Callum didn't argue. He simply stood, calm and resolute. "I have no grand statement," he said, his eyes fixed on the judge, a silver-haired woman with a sharp tone but thoughtful eyes. "I have one request." He knelt beside Sophie, whispering. She looked at him, wide-eyed, then nodded. Together they walked to the front. The judge gave a slight nod to the clerk, who motioned to the interpreter. Maya was called to the stand. She walked forward slowly, her heart pounding in her ears. But then Sophie saw her and smiled. Just that. It was enough. Maya sat, held out her hands gently. "Do you want to speak?" Sophie nodded. Her small hands trembled. Then she looked at Maya, and for the first time she spoke. "Maya." The word cracked open the silence like sunlight breaking through clouds. The courtroom froze. The judge leaned in, her face softening. Sophie turned to Maya, then signed carefully, clearly. "My dad is where I feel safe. She helps me speak. This is my home." Maya translated word for word, her voice soft but steady. No one moved, no one breathed. Camille sat frozen. The makeup on her face could not mask the unraveling beneath. Sophie was gently escorted back to her seat. Callum knelt down, arms wide. She ran into them. He whispered something into her ear, but no one needed to hear it. The way he held her said it all. The judge reviewed her notes, lips pressed in focus. Then she spoke. In light of the child's wishes, her demonstrated emotional and communicative progress under Mr. Callum Bennett's care, and the prolonged absence of the mother, I hereby grant full custody to Mr. Callum Bennett. A quiet breath broke through the room. Camille stood, straightened her coat. She said nothing. Didn't look at Sophie, didn't look back. Her heels clicked against the marble, no longer triumphant, just the sound of someone walking away from what they once abandoned. Not all endings come with applause. Sometimes they arrive quietly, like sunlight spilling across hardwood floors, like a child's laughter drifting through an open window. A new month began in a small, peaceful home just outside Seattle. The white picket fence had a fresh coat of paint. Bougainvillea vines danced in the breeze. Inside, the smell of toasted bread mingled with the sound of joy. Maya stood in the kitchen, hair tied up, gently placing flashcards into her tote bag. On the table were hand-drawn images, sign language vocabulary, expressive faces, and emotion games. Today was her first class at the nearby community center. After years of putting dreams on hold, she was officially a sign language teacher for deaf children. Not a grand dream, but a true one, and it was blooming. In the living room, Sophie sat cutting colored paper beside Callum. Her face was radiant. Her hands moved constantly, signing, telling stories, asking questions, full of confidence. There was no trace of the silent girl who once stood frozen by the cafe window. Callum watched her quietly, eyes soft. He didn't need to say much. He simply listened, and sometimes nodded with quiet love. Just last week, for the first time in years, Callum faced the press. Not to talk about Carter Industries, but to speak about what he had lost and what he had finally found again. "My greatest accomplishment," he said, voice steady, "isn't the company I built. It's learning to listen without sound. My family taught me that." In the photo printed with the article, Maya stood behind him, holding Sophie's hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. You could see it in her eyes. A woman who gave everything not through words, but through understanding and quiet love. And Sophie, now not just a child who knew how to sign, but a little girl who knew she was loved, who stood tall and smiled like the sun. That afternoon, the three of them went to the park. Beneath the trees, Callum read a book, Maya sketched in her notebook, and Sophie chased butterflies. She turned, waved, and signed, "I love you, Daddy. I love you, Miss Maya." Callum looked at Maya. She smiled, and in that simple moment, without a single word, They knew this was home. Not because of where they were, but because they had each other. That afternoon, the breeze moved gently across the porch. Sophie was coloring in the front yard. Callum was tending to the garden near the fence, and Maya was organizing her teaching tools for the next day. A car pulled up quietly. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, this time not flawless, not polished. Camille, no makeup, no heels, just a simple cardigan and a small paper bag in hand. Callum stood, paused for a moment, but said nothing. Sophie looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. Camille walked slowly to the fence. Her voice no longer carried defense, only something trembling. "I'm not here to fight for custody. I just came to say I'm sorry." She knelt down, placing the paper bag gently on the fence. Inside was an old photo, her and Sophie when she was just a toddler, both smiling. "I didn't know how to love you when you needed me most, but thank you for surviving without me, and for forgiving me." Sophie didn't speak. She walked forward, took the photo carefully, then raised her small hands to sign. "I forgive you." Camille looked up, eyes searching for Maya, who stood quietly at the top of the porch steps. "Thank you for loving her like she was yours." Maya didn't reply. She simply nodded, just once, but in her eyes was a quiet grace. And sometimes that's all forgiveness needs. It was a quiet afternoon. The sky blushed with golden hues as the breeze rustled gently through the trees in the park. The same place where everything had begun. Right under this very tree, Maya once sat with a stick, drawing faces in the dirt to teach Sophie her first feelings in sign language. And today they had come full circle. Callum sat on a bench nearby, reading, occasionally glancing up to watch the two people who meant everything to him. Maya sat beneath the tree, sketchbook in hand, smiling as she drew. Sophie ran barefoot through the grass, her laughter rising like music into the air. Then suddenly, Sophie froze. Her bright blue eyes locked onto Maya with a kind of wonder, like she was seeing her for the first time all over again. Then, soft at first, louder with certainty. "Mama." Maya froze. The sketchbook slipped from her fingers. Her heart skipped a beat. Sophie ran straight into her arms, holding tightly, as if afraid to let go. Maya wrapped her in an embrace, tears spilling freely, not from sorrow, but from the sheer overwhelming beauty of hearing that word, from that little voice. Callum walked over, his arms folding around them both. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. There was only warmth, connection, and love, unconditional and true.